Welcome to the Change Gang podcast with me, your host, Laura Ordile. I'm here to help you hold on to your sanity and your soul as you move through big change in your life. I'm here to guide you, inform you, and hopefully help you to triumph over trauma and the long list of symptoms that come along with it. This podcast series is to bring knowledge, share stories, and open up conversation around hope for those of you that suffer with the difficulties that present themselves in your life, from diagnosed or undiagnosed trauma. Labeled or not, I know you need help, and so do those that have graciously taken the time to have these conversations with me. So let's get to it.
Welcome, Change Gang. Welcome to this wonderful new series on trauma and all the little labels that come with that, whether it's PTSD, CPTSD. Gosh, I could probably make a list of 20 different things, but I'm not going to do that today. So I have a great guest with me today. I have Gareth Evans, and he is an amazing trauma specialist. And I want to talk with him a little bit about his story and what he thinks is important in knowing about trauma and healing trauma. Hi, Gareth. How are you doing today?
I'm very well, thank you. How are you? And thank you very much for having me on board.
Well, thank you for being here. I truly appreciate it. And you have a wonderful website called Remaster Your Mind. I love that. I think that's a great way of putting it, because that's what you're doing. You're remastering the mind when you're going in and helping people with trauma, right?
Yeah. I love the title. Shame I couldn't get .com at the end of it. Oh, I would love that, but somebody else beat me to the mark, so I've got .co.uk at the end. But no, it's a lovely title, I think.
It is. And one of the things I want is you actually have on your website. I was reading through it the other day, and it says PTSD is not something that is wrong with a person. It's not effectively a disorder at all, even though it has been labeled as such by the medical community. It's a collection of symptoms which are a reaction to something or a number of things that have happened to a person. And I think that describes it really well. Why did you choose to put that particular thing? I know you have a little bit of history yourself with it, and I'd love for you to share that and how you came about helping people, because you have a great history, a long one with that.
Yeah, no, thank you. So I had PTSD myself, CPTSD. Back in the day, I didn't know which way was up, and I found it very, very difficult to manage to cope and just to lead a normal life. I was in the military. I was in the British Army for 20 years. 15 of those years, I was in the front line, going to Afghanistan, going to Iraq, and other very hot places within the Middle East. And as much as I loved the time I spent in the army and the brothers that I made while I was over there, it was brilliant, but at the same time, there was many things that chipped away to create the bubble of what PTSD is. Bear in mind that PTSD doesn't start when you join the army or when you see your first incident. It starts right at the back, the first 5 years of your life, the most important. Anyway, going back to my military time, I spent 15 years in the Royal Scots Dragoon Guards, where I was a tank commander. And then that's when many of the triggers for PTSD were coming to me. And I find it very interesting, really, to analyze what was going on for me. I didn't understand what was going on, so I was trying to pick apart myself. And I picked up a book. It was called The Chimp Paradox by a professor, I believe. And that book is a gateway into mental health. It's a bloody good book. If you've never read it, pick it up. Go and get yourself a copy. And I really, really found what he had to say about the conscious mind and the subconscious really interesting. So this was about my 14th, 15th year in the army. At this point, self-diagnosis, I figured out that there was something wrong. And my best plan was to get out of the front line. So I transferred over to the Army Welfare Service. And I spent 5 years in the Army Welfare Service. And that's really broadened my horizon of understanding what it really means to have mental health issues. And this is a broad spectrum from standard anxiety all the way to complex PTSD. So I was working one-to-one with clients or as couple relationships. I was also doing talks, speaking to the welfare officers within the army. And I was loving life. I really was. And then there was another incident that happened where, unfortunately, I had a false accusation put against me of rape. I was able to debunk it, but the impact that it had kicked off the CPTSD, and I ended up leaving the military. I ended up being right back to square one. In fact, minus 4 or 5 steps. Right. So although I was the 15 years I was in Afghanistan and Iraq, and I was very, very kinetic environments, and there was lots of blood and there was lots of death, and from both sides, it wasn't until these truly traumatic event of having this false accusation that really set me over the edge. Yeah, so that's my military time. And then when I left the army, it was my wife who got me into hypnotherapy. To be perfectly honest with you, I gave it no interest. I believed it was shockingly terrible. Didn't want anything to do with it. I believed it was pink and fluffy, and I hated the idea. I thought it's just too out there. Until I started listening to different things, and it coincided my beliefs and reinforced my understanding of what it was and the directness to the subconscious. So everything that I learned in the Army Welfare Service, I use holistically, but I do not use that anymore. I never use one-to-one unless it's coaching after I've done hypnotherapy. I don't use couples therapy until after both of them I've looked in around therapy side of things. And every single time I speak to a public forum, I always involve hypnotherapy. And that's where you and I meet at the Beat Retreat. And it's just another level. It's just another bow to the string as such. And it's really interesting. So that's kind of the journey from joining the army when I was 17 years old to leaving the army. And then 2 or 3 years down the line from leaving the army and developing my own business of Remaster Your Mind. Sorry if I've gone off a tangent. Hopefully I've answered your questions, because I am terrible at going off on one.
You did great. You did great. And I have about 72 questions, but I'm gonna reel it back just a little bit. First of all, I agree with you absolutely with hypnotherapy and going in first, because I think that when you really want to instigate change, if you don't start at that subconscious level, you can do it, but it's harder, it's more difficult, it's going to take so much longer, and you might or might not actually get there. But I think with hypnotherapy, it's quicker, it's easier, it's more complete, and you're actually going to see the changes that happen, don't you think?
Totally agree with you.
Yeah. I want to go back a little bit, because I know that one of the statements that you made is so significant in dealing with trauma and PTSD, is that oftentimes something happens at a younger age, and we don't even think about that. Because today it might not be that traumatic to us, or today we think that's just how it was. That was just our life. That was how we grew up. It was what it was. This person was difficult, or I got the belt, or, whatever it was that came into play there, drug deals to happen, for things to be broken into, for all these things that were that's just how it was. I didn't know any different. I didn't think any different. And now I realize that there were some things that were quite different. So when you talk about that it's almost a predisposition of PTSD, something that can be what we don't even consider significant today can be that. Do you see that with a lot of people that you deal with, even maybe in your own life?
Absolutely, yeah. I just want to point out, so many people that say that resonate PTSD with only being soldiers. Mm-hmm. And that is by far untrue.
Yes.
Let me just put a caveat on there. 90% of soldiers that join the military come from derogatory backgrounds. Now, I don't mean derogatory as in like, oh, it's hell on earth. It's the lower class.
Yes.
So when soldiers do have PTSD, it stems from their childhood, not from the events that happened whilst they was in the army. So yes, I do believe that, as you say, the predispositions of trauma creates PTSD. I like to think of it as a volcano. Now, when you were the first 5 years of your life, extremely important. It's the difference between putting in, if you get 2 brand new computers side by side, both of them are top spec everything, but you put in Windows 11 or 12 or whatever on at the moment and boot that up, it's going to run really nicely and really efficiently. If you put in, I don't know, Windows Vista, it's going to have the same mechanics, same graphics cards, but it's going to run slower. It's going to run with bits. It's going to be very bitty and not very good at all. So if you can imagine that, back to another volcano, if you are even pre-birth, even whilst you're in the womb, you can still understand what's going on. You can't understand words that's being said, but mummy and daddy are yelling at each other, and all the cortisol is running through mummy's brain into my brain. I'm feeling anxious before I'm even born. So the very moment that you are born, those first 5 years is what you're going to learn. You're going to learn how to adapt to your scenario, to your situation, to the events. And it's those 5 years that you're programming that computer. So that volcano, when you're born, I don't want to say normal people, that's unfair, but people that's not been exposed to serious trauma, to very traumatic trauma, if you would. But those people that have been exposed to it, that volcano is starting to erupt. Well, it's not starting to erupt. It's there. It's active.
Starting to build.
Exactly. And the older you get, maybe the year, 2 years, 3 years, and this sort of solidifies everything that's going on. I've learned that I need to not do this in front of dad because he's going to smack me. I've learned to watch my mouth in front of friends because they're going to get their older brother on me. I've learned that if I fight everyone, then nobody wants to engage with me. Brilliant. I'm learning all these things at such a young age that if I slap someone, they're going to cry and run off. Therefore, I'm not going to be interactive anymore. Completely depending on the parents anyway. And then when you get to that 5-year-old state, 5-year-old state of mind when everything is solidified and that volcano is active and it's just sat in the background. And then you move on towards 10, 11 years old and you're going to school and you're getting bullied throughout the years and it's all compacting. And then many people want to get out of their lifestyle. Many people join the military and they go down that stage where they see traumatic things and then that's what triggers them. Anyway, has that answered your question? I've got to keep asking this question because
you don't have to keep asking that. Yes, you did. Yes, you did. And I appreciate that you go into the detail that you go into because it is important for people to understand, and the way that you're speaking about it, it is explaining that. And the thing is, there's so many of those precursors, those predispositions that we don't even think about. Premature birth can be one of them. Losing a parent or losing them in terms of divorce can be one, or even something as simple as, you know, a small event that happened where somehow you feel traumatized as a 2-year-old that because you got yelled at, or there was a family fight, or there was something that you would now deal with in a whole different way. But because that's your age and at that point you're traumatized, something happens, and that something is that your subconscious comes in and builds that little part of yourself to deal with that. And now you have that part inside of you who is 2 years old dealing with this trauma. And if you think about, we talked for a few minutes before we got started where those little people have those big emotions and don't exactly know how to process them. So when you're trying to deal with that as an adult, you have these feelings that are coming up that you don't understand because this little part of you is having a tantrum and bringing it out in terms of irritable bowel syndrome, insomnia, weight gain or weight loss, or nightmares, or all of these things that you would never take back to that one point. I'm not saying it's absolutely only that one thing that happened to you in life. Obviously, that's the one little thing that started turning the volcano. And then, you know, when you got bullied, you threw a little more in there and it started going a little more. And then, you know, you had something happen when you got a little older. And then especially going, I think, into the military where it's not, I happen to be a military family. So thank you for all you did. And I appreciate it and I understand. But it is about going in there and then you deal with boot camp, which is not a fluffy pink thing. Like you said, it's not this little thing that you do. It's harsh. It's hard. It pushes you in ways that you might not even think you can be pushed. And then you go and deal with these things that they say, here, you're going to go do this. and it's not an option. It's not a yes or, gosh, I don't really feel like doing that. You're going to go do that. You are not in control, basically, of what's going on for the most part in your life. And that's a big deal, I think. But outside of that, even outside of the military, that happens to people that have those situations. And one of the things you say, so when you talk to somebody who comes to you and says, I have ADHD, I have PTSD, I have whatever it is label that they put on there, do you go in and explain, hey, that's fine, but that's just a label? Let's talk about what's going on underneath that.
Yeah, every single time. So many people, I've noticed more this generation of people, they love to label things. And that's cool. It's okay because then it kind of defines you a little bit, but you don't want to wear these things around your chest like a medal. What you need to do is just back off a little bit. Okay, don't pigeonhole as that issue. Oh, I've got ADHD, so I'm not able to do this. I've got depression, so I've got to do that. Well, many people don't really know what these truly mean. They just have this label of what they are and who they think they are, and then they sort of push themselves into the corner and say, I can't do that anymore. I can't do this, I can't do that. Or they're just overwhelmed from the symptoms, but not understanding the symptoms, but they make themselves feel a little bit better because they can say, I've got anxiety, I've got this. Well, what actually snaps me is the word my. Oh, I don't like that. My PTSD, my anxiety, no, sorry, but no. It's not yours. Much like if you broke your arm, or it's like, oh, my arm's broken. My broken arm. No, it's your arm. Your arm is broken. Or if you've got the cold, you're not going to say, it's my cold. No. If you start changing your mindset of what's going on for your body, if you don't want it, don't claim it. And if it's mine, then it's mine. So if I've got, let's just say I've got cancer, heaven forbid that I don't have it. And for those people listening, I'm sorry that if you have it, but don't say it's my cancer. Jesus, you don't want it. It's got nothing to do with you. Get rid of it. If you can't find ways to get rid of it, find other ways to get rid of it. And if it's, so where we are at the moment is just looking at these things and saying, why do you have that? What physical symptoms has come from emotional trauma? Because when we look at trauma in itself, many people act differently. You and I can go through the exact same scenario. You and I can both be in Afghanistan and we will view very different things differently. Yes. For example, Afghanistan is one of the most beautiful countries I've ever been to. And I mean that from the bottom of my heart. The amount of times I've been on and just looking at all the mountains and just the lakes and the rivers running through it and the sand, stunning, beautiful. That guy sat next to me on stag, looking out for enemy. He's hyperactive, he's worried, he's scared, he's looking for enemies, and that's the worst place in the world he could possibly be. He's not taking in because he's just focused on the what-ifs, could-bes. And that's fair enough, but two different perspectives from the same position.
Yes, absolutely. I think that's so true. When you're in the middle of something like that and you're in that hypervigilance or you're in the severe fatigue or you're in some of those situations, it is hard to see anything outside of it. And that's why I think it's so important to go in and reset that, clear that, get rid of it and change the perspective. And I think it's so hard sometimes for people to see that there is another way. There absolutely is another way when you're dealing with something so difficult. How did you do that? How did you decide? I don't know what your specific symptoms were, but when you were in the middle of like, okay, something's not right with me here. I know that I'm not experiencing life the way that I'm supposed to be experiencing life. How did you finally decide, hey, I need to step in and get a little help. I need to do something to get out of this particular mindset?
Okay, so I think we're looking at two slightly different portrays, really. The first one is whilst you're in the battle, there is no other thoughts. When you go, as you say, battle camp or basic training, over here we would call it, they get rid of the civilian. They enforce everything on you. So you need to fight to the finish. You need to expose the enemy, and you need to become stoic. You have to become stoic. And for the listeners that don't really understand what stoic means is, if your mate dies next to you, you can't break down to tears and you can't go and try and give him a hug. There's an enemy to kill. You need to push down every single emotion that you have, look to the right and look to the left and think to the finish. You need to fight through the enemy, expose the enemy, and move on to the next one. Then move back to the casualties. Deal with the casualties from a safe location. So when you're in a firefight, no, there's no thinking about what am I thinking. I've got to think like the enemy, and I've got to think like a soldier. And I need to apply tactics that I've been taught and enforce the stoicism and then move forward. The problem with that is when people leave the army, they remain stoic. And everybody just sees them as a robot, because if you suppress one emotion, you suppress every single one of them. So if you're suppressing sadness, you suppress happiness, joy, anger, you push everything. And then the only ones that float back to the top again is your anger, which is a secondary emotion of being vulnerable, and guilt. Anyway, going back to the question, because I feel that I've pushed it out a second. So how did I know that I needed some help? Well, this is several years later. And I remember one time just lying in my bed, one small snippet. And I remember I had all my clothes ironed for parade the next day up behind the door. And I just didn't want to put the clothes on. I didn't want to have a shower because I didn't want to get ready to put my clothes on and go into work and stand on parade. And I just felt that real anxiety, fear of the unknown, fear of whatever was going on with me. It's like, I don't want to, I do not want to, I do not want to. And I just kept repeating myself. And then I started becoming ill. The more I repeated what was going on, physical symptoms started coming. I wasn't aware of that at the time. I just knew I didn't want to do it. The second time, well, the big thing was I was self-harming a lot, but I didn't realize. I was drinking a lot. I was and going down to, I was in a place in Germany called Walsrode, and there was a local bar called Alexander's. And what I used to do is I used to go down to Alexander's, and there was always soldiers outside smoking. The smoking will come in. And I had a thing against infanteers at this point, only because my commander died, and it was infantrymen that was taking photos. So there was a massive statue of Saddam Hussein, and all the infanteers would stop, get a photo taken as a group, and then they would move on. And then we went on for a routine patrol with some VIPs, and we got hit by an IED at vulnerable points, which is where all the infanteers kept getting their photos taken. So for a while, I was very angry with infantry. So I was getting myself drunk and then going down to this bar and just getting into a fight with the biggest and tallest guy there was in the group, and then trying to fight my way out from the group. And usually people would restrain me and say, what are you doing? What are you doing? And then I'll try fighting them. And then I realized after this happened quite a few times. I was walking back and I had a bloody nose and sore bits here and there. And I was like, what am I doing to myself? And I realized, I'm wanting to get hurt. I don't really care what the infantry did. They was doing their job and they got some photos. Jesus, if you look on my laptop, there's thousands of photos of me in theaters in Iraq and Afghanistan, all these different places. And it's like, I don't like starting fights, but I felt good being sore. And I felt good being drunk. And these things sort of come hand to hand. And it was so relaxing for me when I sit down and just say, like the DOMS, when you've been in the gym for a long time, you're feeling really achy. I wouldn't say proud of myself. I felt good. Yeah. I felt good that the way I felt. But one night after that, I got into a massive punch up. But it was too big of a punch up because some of my friends joined in because they saw me fighting in a different regiment. So that regiment come onto my regiment, and it was just a brawl. And I remember just stumbling back from the town. I'd come across this music shop, and in there was a violin. I always thought I wanted to play the violin. And I thought, do you know what? The best way for me to stop being so angry, to stop drinking so much, to stop hurting myself as much as I would. Bear in mind at this point, I still didn't know I was self-sabotaging, self-harming. I then went in the following day when it was up, and I got over my hangover, and I said, look, I booked myself in for some sessions to play on the violin. Unfortunately, the instructor, he only lasted one session with me because he asked me why I wanted to at such a late age. Usually I start at 3 or 4. And then I think it scared him a little bit I was quite muscly back in the day. And anyway, yeah, I knew I had a problem, but I had to put it together like a jigsaw puzzle. Yeah. I needed to say, I'm angry. I'm anxious. I'm worried. I've got this inner critic telling me nasty, horrible things about myself. Yeah. And what I learned later on is I was really depressed. Although I put a veil over it.
Yeah.
And I realized that there's 4 parts to depression. I'm sure that you already know, but for the listeners, I'm going to say that there's 4 pillars to depression. One of them is isolation, just removing yourself from everybody. The second one is suppressing. Remember what I said earlier on, if you suppress one emotion, then you suppress every single one of them and you just come out like a robot. The third point of depression is that inner critic, that nasty, horrible thing in the back of your mind. I call it the demon on your shoulder saying all the things that you shouldn't do that and all the other. Bear in mind, it's there to protect you, to look after you, but it suppresses you. It holds you down. And the fourth pillar to depression is something that is unattainable, something that you want that you can't get. Maybe you lost one of your parents, or maybe you lost your job, or maybe you no longer have the finances you once had, or whatever that looks like. It's something that's unattainable to you. And so depression was now, as I view it, one of the pillars next to anxiety of PTSD. So if you imagine a triangle, PTSD is at the very top, depression and anxiety, and depression is just those 4 pillars of what holds PTSD up.
And so that, through the process of figuring that out for yourself and coming to those conclusions and not wanting to get into the brawls anymore and all of these things that kind of went along that process, you started to change things for yourself. You moved into that. And then you said at one point, obviously, that your wife, who's your wife now, brought in hypnotherapy. And at first, obviously you said no, which a lot of people will do. Absolutely. Because, being up on stage clucking like a chicken thing sometimes, or how could that work? And did you use that for you, or did you see that as a tool to, oh my gosh, this could have really helped me more, and I want to use this going forward?
It's a difficult one, really. So when I learned about hypnotherapy, I could not be hypnotized. My psychological barriers, as you could say, way too thick. There's no chance no one's getting in there. And even today, I will not easily at all get hypnotized. I will only open up to people that I know, trust. And if I don't really know them, they just come out. I designed something called the primer. So when I work with my clients, I give them the primer. When I work one-to-one with clients, I listen to the primer for 1 week. And that primer is my voice. And I speak to them and I explain. It's just a gentle dip into hypnosis and bring them back out with 111 hertz in the background, the divine holy frequency, for those that may know of it. And they listen to that every day for a week. And on the 7th day, we then have our hypnotherapy when I've broken down the psychological barrier. So going back to your question, yes, I had to go through a lot of self-awareness before I come to the conclusion. I am very critical and reflective, and I needed to be critical of my emotions, and I needed to be reflective of my behaviors so I can create this holistic understanding of me with anxiety, me with depression, me with PTSD, me with CPTSD, all these different things. I needed to break down who I was. I loved helping people. I've been helping people for years, but this helped me channel it all. When it comes to becoming aware of what hypnotherapy was, I was extremely boycotting it. It's not for me. So I faked the first few times of pretending to be under hypnosis, only because I wanted to try. I say faked. I tried my best to be hypnotized. It wasn't working. So as I was training to be a hypnotherapist, I was working with other people. So you do me and I do you and you do me. And so I was faking it quite a few times, trying to break down this barrier, because I was having my internal war as much as these people needed their own versions of training for them to become qualified. So I was hypnotizing them, and I was being fake hypnotized. I mean, if any of those people are listening, I'm really, really sorry. I'm not going to name names, but I was making up my own scenarios and this, that, the other, until it kind of clicked. And then it was my wife that was able to hypnotize me. I was like, all right, now I get it. And then I've heard so many different people have epiphanies from what I've said. Although my wife is a very good hypnotherapist, I never had the epiphany that I give other people. Again, It's a strange world out there.
But you decided at that point, though, that, I mean, going into hypnotherapy, you knew going into looking at it, that it was going to make a difference. It was going to help people. It was going to change the way that you worked as well.
That's right. Yeah.
Yeah.
Completely.
And I think it's great that it was your wife. I think that's a trust factor right there that kind of brings that in, that it allows someone to kind of get in there and do that. And it's so funny because I have to tell you that I was working and he was a military man actually, and someone I'm close to, and I was doing some work, and it was when I was learning to do it. And I said, I need to do this. I need to practice. Oh yeah. And I was doing it, and about partway through I said, you're kind of faking this, aren't you? Like, well, and I said, you don't need to do that. And it's like, well, but you needed to do this. And I said, it's okay. It's all right. So I want to have a longer conversation with you on that. But for now, we're going to go ahead and wrap this up. And I want to say thank you, Gareth, so much for being here, for talking about your background and all the different things that led you to learn about this, and for people to know that labels are just labels. They're a lot like bumper stickers. They're just kind of stuck on you, but that doesn't mean you can't move through life in the way that you want to move through that. And don't let it change the way that you are healing yourself or the way that you are moving in the direction that you want to move in. So where can they find you out in the world? Tell them where they can find you and how to get in touch with you and anything else that you want to add.
Yeah, so hopefully you can add a couple of links at the end of this, but as we said at the very start, my website is www.remasteryourmind.co.uk. I'm on Facebook. I've got a page called Remaster Your Mind, and I've got a group called Remaster Your Mind PTSD. And yeah, my name's Gareth Evans. If you want to meet up as a friend, just for casual advice or conversations, I'm here. If not, more professional, jump on it doesn't really matter. You're still going to get through to me.
That's great. That's great. Thank you for that. And yes, absolutely. I'll be linking all those. And actually, I'll go ahead and in a minute, I'll get the information from the book that you mentioned in the beginning, and I'll include that because you said it was a really great book, and I love really great books. So we'll put that in there too. Thanks so much, Gareth, for being here. Go and have a happy day, and we'll talk some more.
Pleasure's all mine. Thank you very much.
I hope today's episode was interesting and helpful to you in some way. If so, find someone to share it with. Maybe it will help them too. If you'd like to know more about anything discussed here today, you can find all of the places to connect with me and the guest speakers in the show notes. Or go to lauraordile.com, LauraOrdile.com, and you can reach out to me there. Until next time, ask when you need help, be kind to yourself, and have a happy day.